and welcome back to Gamblecast. It is the podcast that focuses on all things sports betting, online casino, and poker. Today, I am joined by Ryan Butler. Ryan is Gambling.com's US sports betting correspondent. Ryan, how are you?
Doing well. I'm glad to be here. How are you doing, Richard?
I'm not too bad. I'm good. The sun is shining. I'm happy. I'm ready to get into this. Today, we have a very interesting topic on the table to discuss. We're going to be having a chat about US sports betting. So, for anybody who doesn't know, back in May, there was a groundbreaking taking back of legislation that was passed in 1992 in America, passed by the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, was taken back, and it's essentially opened up the US for state-by-state legislation of sports betting. So Ryan has been doing a lot of kind of research into this, and we're writing quite a bit about it. So he's going to take us through a little bit of the backstory and kind of up to where we are now. So Ryan, it's strange for us to think in Europe, we're based here in Ireland, it's strange for us to think about sports betting as this kind of almost taboo sort of thing, this thing that hasn't really been explored before, because there's a bookie on essentially the corner of every street. Tell me a little bit about the history there of gambling, and tell me a little bit about sports betting in the US up until this point.
Definitely. I think the best way to look at this is an example I like to use. So for Richard, so in the US, there's about 330 million people here. And of course, us in the States, we love our McDonald's. Those seem like everywhere. How many McDonald's do you think there are in the United States, our big country here?
How many McDonald's? I'd say 10,000.
Okay. 10,000. That's a really good guess, actually. There's about 15,000 for us here in the US. And that averages about one McDonald's for every 22,000 people. For comparison, as you know, there are a lot of book shops everywhere in the UK, Ireland, and in the UK alone, for example, there's about 8,500 for a country of about 66 million. That averages about one bookshop for about every 7,000 people or so. So to put that in comparison, there are 3 times as many bookshops, sports betting parlors, whatever, in the UK than there are McDonald's in the United States. Okay. That's kind of your baseline there.
That's probably something that people wouldn't have realized. That's a pretty crazy number. I wouldn't have known that as well, but still.
Exactly. And especially from the American perspective, we just, we still have this kind of stigma with gambling even now. But it just, it kind of sums up everything with just how widespread it is there and how rare it is in the US, which is interesting also when you think about it. The US hasn't always been as gambling adverse. Near our country's history, we started out with a lottery, actually helped fund a lot of our early stuff. We kind of had the Wild West in the 1800s, this image of cowboys and saloons that we sort of glorified, the poker player and all that. That sort of changed around the 1900s, the turn of the century there. There was a lot of different prohibition type movements, different temperance things. Basically, they tried to outlaw everything. We even constitutionally banned alcohol for more than 10 years, which is now almost impossible to imagine that we did that. So about that gambling too, anything you can consider a quote unquote vice for a while. Fortunately though, with the US, we have our 10th Amendment, which is basically what allows our 50 states have a pretty good degree of leeway when it comes to their own laws. Which is something that we'll find later as we come back to it, the importance of the 10th Amendment. But with the 10th Amendment, that helped allow the state of Nevada, one of our 50 states. The Nevada is in a desert, and in the 1930s, with the Great Depression, they were really struggling to get people to come live in a desert with no jobs. So they thought to themselves, how do we get people to come move to Nevada? So the first thing they did was they legalized prostitution. They legalized greater divorce. Yeah, they legalized greater divorce laws to help people. Maybe those 2 things were tied, prostitution led to divorce. But the third thing they did was they legalized gambling as a way to try to attract people to come live there. And from there, the small town of Las Vegas grew and became the gaming center of North America that we know today. They allowed that started off there. So they had it. Everyone was okay with Nevada having gambling and all that in the 1930s. And then nothing really happened for about another 40 years. The other 49 states, as we grew, the other states didn't have any gambling, anything like that, kind of let Nevada be. That changed in the 1970s. Similar way, New Jersey, more specifically Atlantic City, which you may be familiar with, it's kind of now considered the East Coast gaming center of the U.S. They were struggling. Atlantic City in the 20s, 30s, 40s had been a real big tourism destination, vacation spot on the East Coast. But as our interstates got better, our roadways, transportation improved, Atlantic City lost a lot of its luster. So it was kind of falling into disrepair. And they thought, well, how do we get people to come visit Atlantic City now? So they legalized casinos. That started, with that. So when that was in 1975, they really got off and running. They did very well. The other states saw that. They saw I worked for New Jersey. The next one, ironically enough, was Mississippi, another one of our states. Mississippi prides itself as the quote-unquote the buckle of the Bible Belt. Very conservative, usually pretty gambling averse. Now, they didn't legalize gambling on their territory, on the land. However, they legalized riverboats along the main river that goes by it and off the coastal areas. Eventually, they realized, eventually they opened up land casinos, but this sort of technicality allowed them to have gambling without having gambling. But Mississippi did it, the floodgates were open. And now, so that was about late 80s, 1990s. Mississippi did it. And now in 2018, I got to double check, but it's about 40 plus states have some sort of land-based casino here. So it's pretty, it's much more widespread. Also what helps is not only in the US do we have kind of state-sanctioned or government-run casinos, we also have Native American casinos. In 1988, the federal government allowed Native American-owned land to offer casinos, under certain regulations and everything with it, but that opened up a lot more opportunities as well. So, by then, so about 30 years ago or so, we kind of get the casino boom, quote unquote, not quite as widespread as it is elsewhere, but, it became more acceptable to it, and they've generated billions and billions of dollars in revenue, which is also part of the reason why our state governments and everyone's pretty much okay with the casinos.
Okay, cool. So, I mean, so it's clear that the US obviously was growing more and more favorable and a little bit more lenient towards gambling over time. Do you think that there's been the same sort of shift for sports betting?
Kind of. It's taking, it's taking a little bit longer there to accept it. But I think for the most part, people are going to be okay with sports betting. There's obviously a lot of emotion and some, moral panic fears that are kind of unfounded, honestly, with it. But yeah, we're going to be more into it. The American Gaming Association estimate there is $150 billion wagered annually on basically what would be our black market sports betting. That's a little bit, a pretty wide-ranging number. We think the estimates might be a little bit less, but there's a lot that goes on with it. Even from here, every March, we have our big collegiate amateur basketball tournament called March Madness. That, pretty much every office in America, come March, will have a friendly gambling pool in their office just for stuff like that. So, kind of, minor stuff, but yeah, sports gambling, definitely. I think there is some warming up to it, though it might take a little bit. It's it's a little more slowly.
So what exactly was it about? So we're talking now, fast forward to 2018, and in May, there was this landmark decision in the courts. What exactly was it that caused that change?
Sorry.
You're okay.
Yeah, no, so as with pretty much everything, the change came down to money. Right. Our friends with in Atlantic City, in New Jersey, after the casino boom of the 1970s, well, everyone else started having casinos. So again, Atlantic City was struggling, trying to generate people, trying to get us tourism and everything with it. So New Jersey figured, well, how do we get people to come here? Well, let's try to do something different. Maybe we can be the first one on the East Coast of the United States to offer sports gambling. So New Jersey, even though there's a federal ban on it, tries to pass its own sports laws. Now, as we talked about, the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act was passed in 1992. That was a federal ban outside a few exceptions. Some of those exceptions included, obviously, Nevada, which had Las Vegas. We wanted to keep that going. We were fine with that, with them having sports gambling. It also included a provision in Montana, which allowed gerbil racing in cities of less than 100 people. I am not making that up. We passed a federal law that allowed that grandfathered in. So people in small towns in Montana in the United States were able to bet on gerbil racing. That was very good. Clearly, we were able to get that in. Even New Jersey, as part of that, New Jersey was offered a 1-year window to pass sports betting. Even though they didn't have it, they were saying, we'll give you 1 year, pass sports betting, and you'll be okay. You'll get in under the law. New Jersey was not able to get that done. Their legislature, which is something, again, we'll see 25 years later, the New Jersey legislature is struggling. So they had that. It's it takes them a while to do a lot of things. We'll see later. But so, they had this, but eventually 25 years later, New Jersey was like, well, now we want to get in. It was too late, but they decided they wanted to get in later. So they began, passing laws saying we're allowed to do this, citing, again, the 10th Amendment. That went to the courts because there is a conflict there, and the courts shot it down. New Jersey changed the law a little bit. Courts shot it down. Kind of went back and forth in legal limbo for about 4 or 5 years there. What really changed things, what unexpectedly, honestly, was the Supreme Court decided to take up New Jersey's challenge. Now that was a huge deal. The U.S. Supreme Court, the ultimate final decision maker, for everything judicial, they take up less than 1% of cases that people ask them to take up. So this is a big deal. Also, when it wasn't something that was on the forefront of America's minds, sports gambling was there, but it wasn't a huge issue. Yeah. When the court takes up an issue like that, it usually isn't just to reject it again, if that makes sense. They were there basically because they thought, well, it was a violation of the 10th Amendment. Each state has a law. Again, the way our Constitution works has a lot of leeway into what laws it can make. And through some convoluted things I didn't fully understand, eventually the Supreme Court ruled in New Jersey's favor. They determined that actually it was a violation of the 10th Amendment. The federal government didn't have the right to tell New Jersey it couldn't make its own laws, essentially, which was a huge change for it. And that really was, kind of the groundbreaking thing. Public opinion had been shifting a little bit towards it, which I think was reflected in the court's ruling, but it kind of came unexpectedly, and that, has opened up the floodgates accordingly.
Okay, cool. And so when the Supreme Court takes on a case like this, that kind of ups the exposure in the media, right? And people start to take more notice of it as well. Do you think that kind of played a factor?
Definitely. It was, though, the court is kind of immune to it. What's interesting is the court took up the case kind of out of the blue, and then everyone responded afterwards to it. Now, there is some idea that maybe the court did feel some pressure as it got, picked up. The court, I believe, it announced that it was taking up the case, late or middle of 2017, did the ruling in May, announced officially the ruling in May 2018. So there was about 10 months or so kind of a build-up and anticipation towards it. But really, I think the court just deemed it as an opportunity to kind of help, again, look at the 10th Amendment, and it was something that it saw with that. Now, I think there's been hype afterwards a little bit more so. There's been more coverage and everything with it. But it was just, again, it was sort of kind of dormant in sports betting. It was sort of just there, kind of on the side, sort of kind of underground, kind of low key, but, it's opened up differently since then.
Cool. So you've got basically New Jersey battling to legalize sports betting. Eventually we come to this big decision that paves the way for everyone. How have you found that other states have responded to the Supreme Court's ruling?
It's been interesting. It has been all over the place. Again, with the U.S., how we're structured, our 50 states have a lot of degree of what laws they want and everything with it. And we're seeing about 50 different responses. Interestingly enough, New Jersey, which had for years led this challenge, had basically a 10-month head start to kind of understand there's a good chance it's going to happen. They weren't even the first people to get their sports gambling legalized. Right. Actually, Delaware, another U.S. state that borders New Jersey, who had also had some sort of small exceptions from the original federal ban, they got their act together more quickly than anybody else did. And they actually became the second state to legalize sports betting. It was Nevada originally, which already had it. Montana has a turbo racing, but that's kind of, a joke. It's not really a widespread sport thing. And Delaware was able to get its laws going, and they were up and running. They actually beat New Jersey. New Jersey's lawmakers couldn't necessarily agree on all of the final stipulations. Unfortunately, as we're seeing, not only is the Supreme Court, basically all it did was eliminate the federal ban. Now each state has to determine what's going on and makes its own laws and regulations, which, as we've seen, are not necessarily easy. There's a lot of things that go into it. Who controls the regulations? Most states have a lottery board. Some have a horse racing track set up. Some have other gaming commissions. Politicians have their say, interest groups, everyone. So it ends up kind of dividing things all over the place. Eventually, though, New Jersey did get its act together, and they are taking sports bets as well. And now they've actually been, not surprisingly, that followed Mississippi, which, kind of had an edge already, has been more up to gambling. They followed, and they actually just took their first sports bets this weekend. West Virginia will be following soon after, and Rhode Island as well. Those are 6 of the states that are doing it. So what we're going to do is by the end of the year, we'll have 6 states that have some degree, that have basically legalized sports betting, will be taking bets, from there.
So I suppose that kind of shows how quick this is moving. It is, 6 or 7 months after the ruling is passed, you guys are expecting there to be like 6 states that have legalized sports betting.
Yeah, I would say, part of me thinks, I think part of it is cool that it is quick. And part of me is kind of disappointed that it's taking a lot longer for some other states to get their acts together.
Right.
One of the big things that we're looking into is taxation. Not surprisingly, how is revenue distributed? Obviously, it's going to be regulated, but more importantly, it's going to be taxed. The government's going to get its share. One thing we're looking at, one problem, for example, is in Rhode Island, that their tax rate is going to be 51% of revenue, of winnings when they legalize it in October, when they first start taking bets. That, to put that in perspective, Nevada, which has done this for about 60 years, 70 years, theirs is less than 10%. New Jersey's, Delaware's is around 10%. That's pretty fair. That's pretty accurate. Rhode Island's is going to be a big issue for them trying to attract people. They only got one gambling provider to even apply to offer sports bets in that state. IGT, which is a big deal overseas, one of the leading gaming providers, they actually had already had a connection with Rhode Island running their state lottery. So they had, they kind of were there, but they were the only bidder. And they're probably almost regretting that now. 51% of winnings tax is just almost prohibitive. It's going to discourage people. It's a problem. Also put it in perspective, or something else to consider, the state of Pennsylvania would be the 7th state to take sports bets this year. It looks like they won't be able to. They actually legalized sports betting, like New Jersey, even before the Supreme Court ruling. They border New Jersey. They're next to each other. A lot of people cross each other's borders to go, commerce, everything with it. Their problem is they have a 36% tax. Because they have a 36% tax on winnings, none of the casinos there really want to offer sports betting because it's not even worth it to them. So in the meantime, they're holding out. The sports betting is theoretically legalized, but no one has applied to be regulated, through the regulatory process to take the bets. So they have got, even though they want sports betting, they're basically stopping themselves from getting it. New York is in a similar situation. They're having a lot of issues as well with it. But these states are kind of shooting themselves in the foot. They have sports betting there. People want it. If they have the structure, they just start taxing it at such a high level that it's discouraging people from doing it.
Yeah.
That's one of the issues that we're running into. Sometimes it's these self-inflicted regulations, self-inflicted taxes that are actually slowing the progress of something that people want.
Yeah, and I know that on top of that, I've been reading a little bit about some of the big leagues that you guys have over there, trying to justify what they're calling integrity fees, which is if correct me if I'm wrong, but it's is it 1% of all wagers taken or something they want to take? The MLB was trying to justify it again recently, right?
Exactly. Actually, to a degree, all of them are. We have the biggest sports leagues in America, which were the defendant in the lawsuit against Professional Amateur Sports Act. So these were ones who, they didn't want sports betting. They had fought actively in the courts against sports betting. Well, now if there's sports betting, they're like, well, we should get some of the money now because of sports betting, which people are realizing the hypocrisy of that. So they have been lobbying each of the 50 states very hard to try to support it. They are not getting much traction, which is honestly good for everybody. The notion of an integrity fee, that this is essential to protect the game, that if they don't have this 1% to hire security guards or whatever to protect the sport, that it's going to be corrupt and everything is ridiculous. Nevada had sports betting for, again, better part of a century. Not really any major problems. They did it without an integrity fee. The other states will be able to do it as well. So fortunately, because if the sports integrity fee came down, that would actually be then passed on to the wagers, to the gamblers, the people paying it, or the casinos, because since revenues, it hurts everyone, basically for the league's greed, to be blunt. So that is, state lawmakers realize we don't want to give they don't want to give the leagues much of the money. They'd rather keep it for themselves or anything else. So it is an important issue, but fortunately now that is losing traction.
I see. Okay. The sting has been taken out. Tell me a little bit, Ryan. I want to talk about timeframes for sports betting for other states. Is there a kind of a prediction that you guys have, or do you how fast do you see it going after kind of 2018? Where do you see it landing?
Yeah, so I think a good example, a good runway will be how we implemented the lottery in the U.S.
Right.
The U.S. after, again, starting with the lottery in the 1700s, there was a backlash against the lottery. People got rid of that. In the 1960s, that began to change. Again, revenue opportunities. States began passing lotteries state by state by state. Now 44 of the 50 states have lotteries. That took, though, 40 years from that to get to that point. It took a long time for the state by state by state to do it. And one of the biggest factors, actually, for the lottery wasn't necessarily states that wanted the lottery. It was states that were losing revenue to other states that had the lottery. So, for example, if one state got it, if one state had the lottery and another didn't, people in the state without the lottery would travel across state lines to go to that state that had the lottery, and then go play there. And the states are realizing, well, we may not want the lottery, but we're losing money. We have to have the lottery. It's actually interesting. Of the 6 states that do not have the lottery, 2 of them are Alaska and Hawaii. Alaska and Hawaii don't border any other U.S. states. So they're not losing any competition with people trying to play the lottery, and they don't necessarily still, have the impetus to do so. I think that's going to be a very similar system for us here in the state, for sports gambling, When states start to legalize it, step by step, more states are going to realize, oh, we're losing money here, we're going to have to legalize it as well.
Yeah.
In the meantime, though, what we're looking at is, so we have our 6 states right now with full, are going to be fully up and running. We have New York and Pennsylvania that want it. If they can get their act together. It's also important to note of all of that, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, Rhode Island, of those states are all very close to each other. They realize that there's that state-by-state competition, appropriately enough. Positive news is that about 20 states have introduced legislation in some capacity to legalize sports gambling. Now, what's interesting, in the U.S., our state legislatures only meet basically in the first few months of the calendar year, for the most part. Again, all 50 are different. So no laws are passed except beginning in January and ending in usually March, April, May. So there won't be any, movement until that time. But ahead of the 2019 legislative sessions, gambling legislation has been introduced there. My estimation is of the 20 or so that have introduced legislation, about half of those will pass it before the end of 2019. So I think we'll have that. So that'll be another 10 or so by the end of 2019. And I think we'll have another 10 or so by the end of 2020. Again, they're going to start seeing the revenue opportunities. They're going to start seeing other states getting in. They're going to get kind of jealous. They're going to realize they're not going to want to lose that money. So I think we're going to be about half. I think about 25 of the 50 states will have sports gambling in the next 2 years. Afterwards, it's going to be a slow slog. Again, it took 40 years to do the first lottery, 40 years to do the lottery. It might take a similar, maybe not 40 years, but it could take maybe up to 10 for everyone to really get on board. And again, some states are just not going to do it. Our friends in Utah, which is really against everything, they're still living like it's the early 1900s.
Yeah.
Utah even has laws that beer can't be a certain alcohol by volume. It can't be too strong, which is actually below Like in the U.S., our Miller Lite, they have to make, or Bud Light, or beers like that, they make a special beer in Utah to go by the state laws. Would not recommend a stag party in Utah if you're coming to the States. They're probably never going to have sports gambling. Some other states are more conservative, probably won't do it ever. But again, I think the majority of U.S. states will have it, within 10 years. And I think we'll be at about half within 2, more or less.
Okay, cool. Do you think that we should expect to see some federal government involvement even while it's being legislated state by state?
So, and that's something to look at. So, interestingly enough, Orrin Hatch, who was a senator from Utah, of course, Utah, he was one of the co-authors of the original federal ban of sports gambling, is against it. He said shortly after the Supreme Court ruling that he would work on federal legislation. Now, it wouldn't be a ban, but it would be a regulatory framework for it. That positively, one thing that could do is it could strip some of the ineptitude of the state legislatures. As we've seen, they've kind of struggled at times getting things up and running. If we did have a federal framework, where what it would be is that any state that chooses to legalize sports gambling would have to follow this criteria if it so did so, which would then allow, it would take some of it out of the state lawmakers, which might be a good thing. The downside of that is, as you might have heard, our Congress in the U.S. isn't necessarily great at getting things done either, and they might actually make a sports betting law that could be disadvantageous for casinos and, most importantly, for would-be bettors, and revenue opportunities. So that's a possibility, something to look for. The thing is that there isn't a whole lot of motivation to do it at a federal level. Orrin Hatch has said it, but hasn't really moved much. There was a hearing scheduled to discuss it. That was actually canceled. It has not been rescheduled yet. And as you may have heard, there are some other bigger issues going on in the U.S. right now getting our attention. So it's not a big pressing concern. Something to keep an eye on. Also, Orrin Hatch is retiring. His term will end in January 2019, and he is the biggest person against gambling. So, once he's gone, I think there's even a lesser chance of that happening. And again, the 10th Amendment, how we work a lot of things is we do like to give our states a lot of leeway and autonomy. So I would not bet on any meaningful federal legislation.
I see. So you think that anybody who would try to get involved from the federal government, similar to Orrin Hatch, it might be just because of a kind of a moral sort of what's the word that I'm looking for? A moral
antagonism, or
not kind of wanting it in that sense, as opposed to being maybe a profitability thing or something like that. It's more so just
kind of like, honestly, the reality is regulated gambling is, honestly advantageous for everyone. It helps the government, it helps support things, like that. Even though like the, here in, our Cax Media office, Gambling.com office in the U.S. is based in the state of Florida. When they passed the lottery, they have part of that revenue goes to education here. That has contributed billions of dollars in scholarships for students in the state of Florida. Stuff like, it's gambling. I guess there's an irrational moral panic about it, but ultimately it behooves everyone to legalize it, get it out of the shadows, get it out there, get the revenue going.
Yeah.
So it is kind of in, state governments, well, again, money. They love getting more money there, for their state coffers and everything with it. So I think it would be maybe an irrational fear. Again, the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act was this fear that people are going to be dropping millions of dollars and bribing our athletes to throw games and stuff, which is just not something that's materialized. So, and again, money oftentimes trumps a lot of moral fears.
I see. Was there anything about sports betting, about this whole situation since May, that's kind of been a bit of surprise to you so far? Anything there?
Honestly, the biggest surprise is the diversity of states that have embraced sports gambling. We go from small states population-wise, big states population-wise, states in the East, states in the West, states that are more conservative, states that are more liberal, which is something rare that we've had this much, diversity when it comes to states. And then the next wave of states that have introduced legislation, same deal. There is no consistent pattern. It's not any one political party that's really been behind it. It's not been any region. It's not been any, population type constraints and everything with it. So it just kind of shows that There are just states that are more attuned and more willing to accept and realize the benefits of structured, regulated gambling, including in sports, and states that, and is tourism, as well, and states that aren't. Again, also one of the big things as I've researched more and more, sports gambling is definitely an asset when it comes to revenues, but it's more so the tourism aspect of it.
Yeah.
It's people who are attracted to it. And it's not just the casinos, but it's the industry. It's the restaurants nearby. It is the hotels. It is, people betting on slots. It's everything else. Or not betting at all, going to an amusement park or a zoo or a circuit or whatever, the tourism with it. I think it's I've used an example here. One of the things we're looking at is so Florida and Mississippi are both on the Gulf Coast region of the southeastern United States. They both have beaches and they both have stuff like that. When you're looking at it, if Americans want to go on a holiday and they're looking, okay, well, do I want the Florida beaches or maybe I want to go to Mississippi? Well, maybe Mississippi has that sports gambling that I can't get in Florida. That's revenue that's going to Mississippi, which has the same infrastructure, in a way to attract tourism in that region. And that's something that we're going to see. And I think that's where it kind of helps trigger the dominoes, where these states are going to realize, oh, wait, we're losing out on tourism dollars. Tourism is the best thing for states because it's out-of-state money coming in. They really want to support that. So, that's another big thing that we're seeing there. So the diversity of states, and then this opportunity to really support sports betting as an opportunity to fund more tourism growth.
I see. It's an interesting point that you probably might not consider before. Ryan, I'm going to finish up in a couple of minutes. Before we do that, I want to ask you, for anyone listening, what's the overall impact going to be in the US from this legislation? What's going to be the broader scale of things?
Well, one of the big things is, I'll put this in perspective of the existing US gambling industry. So if you look through it, obviously, as we talked at the very beginning of this, gambling is much more widespread in the UK, Ireland, over in Europe. But the sheer size and population size of the US means our market is much bigger. I'll put this in example. The existing casino industry, not even the Native American casinos, the state-sponsored casinos, had $60 billion in revenue or more each year. Horse tracks contribute several billion dollars each year. The U.S. lottery across the states that have the lottery is $80 billion a year in lottery revenues.
Yeah.
In comparison, the entire UK gambling industry is 14 billion pounds, or about $18.5 billion already. You look at just the sheer size of what we have here. So what this means is that there's estimates from industry experts that, assuming that these states legalize sports betting, that we think we will on the same trajectory, within the next 5 years, the U.S. sports betting market will be the largest in the world. Yeah, which is kind of amazing to think. We go from zero to biggest in the world in less than 5 years. When you have that, that puts more and more emphasis on the U.S. because these companies are realizing, okay, the market is getting bigger there. That means more American sports, I think, will actually have a more widespread impact. That means they might be more available in books, across overseas, across stuff like that. And it's also going to, it's going to have a huge impact globally because it's going to become a much bigger focus. In the U.S., one thing we'll look at is I think it's going to be a lot bigger advertising as more and more states do it. If you guys are familiar with daily fantasy sites, which is something very popular in the U.S. when they first started out, one of them is FanDuel, which is now acquired by Paddy Power Betfair, one of their subsidiaries. When they started on the market, everywhere you turn were advertisements for it. I think we might see something similar like that. We might be seeing, William Hill is right now probably the leading bookmaker in the U.S. just because they kind of had a head start in Las Vegas. They're in New Jersey now. Maybe advertising stuff like that. That's going to be a lot more revenue and a lot more going in with that. It's going to become more and more part of the U.S. discourse. We're already starting to see more programming on our sports networks, slowly getting more towards gambling, which will only compound it. And I think, one of the biggest things is it's going to change the perception. Even now, the U.S. still sort of has this idea of gambling on sports is shady guys in trench coats in dark alleyways. If you don't pay up on time, they're going to send some goon with a baton to break your knees in. There's still this image of that. I think that's going to start changing very quickly here, and realizing, we're going to get closer. I love the idea. It's not a phrase we have in the U.S., but taking a punt on a game or something, taking a punt on a match. I think we're going to start to change that. We're going to realize that, hey, you know what? It might be enjoyable. Let's throw $10 in here on this match, this game that we're interested in. It makes the experience better. It also helps the sports leagues. There are a lot of obscure games. We are a very sports obsessed culture. We have a lot of games though, and a lot of them are not marquee matchups, are not enticing. This is a way to get people more interested in some of these games. That's more rating for television. That's good for the sports leagues. And the biggest one, I think, kind of intangibly, but as a huge sports fan and somebody who enjoys all this, that's good for us. It makes sports a bigger part of the deal, more revenue behind it, more money, more interest, and I think ultimately it's going to be better. So, a lot of things with it. Tangibly it's going to be some more money, but intangibly, I think this really helps kind of change some of these irrational misconceptions about gambling. And I think that's ultimately, that's good for everyone.
Okay, cool. So a lot of positives to take away from this then. Ryan, I want to say thank you very much for joining us today and providing us with your insight. It's been a great conversation. It's been great to hear the kind of situation that you guys have over there. You're kind of on the front lines at the moment. So thanks very much for coming on.
Yeah, glad to be on board. It's exciting here. Slowly but surely, we're making some progress, and I'm excited to keep updating and seeing what's going on here.
Yeah, and we'll be sure to get you back on in the near future to provide us with some more updates on the situation. Thank you very much.
I'm looking forward to it. Thanks, Richard.
So if anybody wants to keep up to date with the US sports betting situation, make sure to follow us on Twitter at gambling_com. If you'd like to find the latest episodes of Gamblecast, we are on SoundCloud and iTunes. Just search Gamblecast there and you'll find us. And that is all that we have for now. Until next time, bye-bye. See ya.